Good evening and welcome. I'm glad you're joining us tonight. This is our 129th episode. And as always, every single podcast, we're really glad.
220.
I'm sorry, I have it. Oh,
I was going to say
my bad.
129. That can't be right.
I put that wrong on my notes here. Oh, yeah, look at that. All of them are twos except for that one. Scribal error. Forgive me. 229th. I've been doing this for a long time. Tonight's podcast title is Are You Tired of You? And I've been, over the last week or two now, really doing a lot of, I hate saying it this way, but self-reflecting, and not from the standpoint of analyzing my life and trying to figure out what's wrong with me, but more just being reminded of where I came from and everything that I used to be. So much has changed in a little over 7 years, and thinking about how much has changed, and then reflecting on when. And honestly, I don't grow tired of talking about it, but to try and pitch try and almost make an offer that, there was a time I really hated who I was, and I didn't like talking about myself. I didn't like telling people my experiences, and the reason why is because I didn't like my experiences. They were very broken, very scattered, and very manufactured in there. The good parts were always, I was making things sound better than they really were. But to actually look back at the last 7 years and all that's changed, and that's not to say that my life is perfect and that everything is going great. There are obvious problems. There are things that we have to work through and things we have to deal with. But I still would not trade what my life has become now for anything I've experienced before. And to be honest with you, thinking about other people's lives, I'd say the same thing. I don't want to trade my life for anybody else's. And there was a time when I would have given anything to be somebody else because I hated who I was. And I understand that might not be the case for everybody. Maybe not everybody hates who they are. I'm not necessarily saying everybody hates who they are and you need to change. But to get to a place where you actually do love where you're at in life, and know you're in the right place, and know that God's involved in your life, is what I'm talking about. And the reason why I say all that is because there is a school of thought, and I've come across a couple of quotes and books and things that I've listened to where people make these statements that insinuate that men and women are at our base nature animals, and that we are driven by animalistic urges and instincts, and everything we do is strictly based off survival and self-preservation and propagation and comfort and safety, and the whole survival of the fittest thing. And it's true to look at people and be able to say some people do act like animals. They live purely on instinct and purely how they feel. But when you read the Bible, Romans 1 says God gave them over to the desires of their heart. Another way you could say that is their base desires. Yeah. And so when you see men acting like animals and just doing what feels good, what you're seeing is the absence of God from a man's life.
Yeah.
Right?
And more. And
please,
more.
Yeah, go expound.
Well, the difference between animals and people is your brain.
Yeah.
This is a medical fact. This is scientific fact. It's not just me saying that, but it is your brain. And so when you see people living only by their instincts, it's because they are not using their brain. They've chosen not to. And I know what that's like. It's funny, depending on what kind of a background that you have. If you've never not used your brain, and then you've used your brain and have the contrast between those two things, what I say wouldn't be offensive. But for those who are unaware that they're not using their brain, it's highly offensive. So if you're offended right now, let the chips fall where they may. But because before I became a Christian, from about 18 years old, I'd say 18 to 21, that 3-year period of time, I stopped using my brain and I started only functioning off of instinct. It was survival. It literally was survival. I got a job to make money to survive. I didn't get a job because I wanted to become something. I got a job because I needed money, and that was all. And the survive was, I needed to eat, I needed a place to sleep, those kinds of things. And usually, when you're that kind of a person, your job isn't well paying, and so you're really struggling, to make it. And so for me, the survival was literally finding people that I could use their couch, or spare bedroom. It eventually ended up, with the whole nightclub scene of finding a girl that was doing better than I was, that could afford to take care of me. But during that period of time, I wasn't using my brain, the human brain. I was using the reptilian brain, the animal brain. That's all. I wasn't using the fully developed brain that God had given us. Even though I was smart, I had, got good grades in school and things like that. My life choices were purely reactionary. They weren't based on trying to go somewhere or get somewhere. And so, that's why I say it the way that I say it, is that when you see somebody like that, not everybody is like that,
Yeah.
but when you see somebody like that, and I certainly was like that, you're looking at somebody who has lost the use of the brain, that God gave them. They've lost the ability to be able to use it properly. And some people never recover from that. Once you start going in that direction, it becomes a slippery slope. It's very difficult to come back from there without a miracle, which I'm very thankful that I received.
So it's you mentioned that without a miracle, same exactly. When I look back at the conversion point of my life, it wasn't something I did. It wasn't like I got tired of being me. And I read a lot of stories trying to use an illustration for this, but I was like, it's just when you read stories, you're looking up Chat GPT or referencing lists. I have this list of I call it an illustrations list, and I have lists of stories that stuck out to me or things that have stuck out to me, things that seem cool, seem creative, seem like they've got some scriptural value to them. I'll put them down in a list, and I've got this really long list, and so every once in a while I'll scroll through that list just to try and spark things in my brain, and I'm looking through that, and a lot of them are just men and women who decided to do something with themselves.
Yeah.
And so it's not like everybody just, doesn't use, you just said that not everybody's like that. Some people do use their brain, but there's something unique that happens when somebody gets converted. And that's kind of what I want to talk about tonight, is this idea of being converted, and not just converted like just becoming a Christian. And I'll clarify that or qualify that in a second. But because when a man converts, or when a man becomes a Christian, or when a man, the Bible says, is in Christ, he becomes a new creation.
Yeah.
All things pass away, old things pass away, all things become new. And that's what happened to me. And honestly, growing up in church, I went many, many years without ever having experienced something like that. But then there's this other side of things where people can become Christians, they get saved, and they have these areas of their lives that they have no control over. There's no dominion. There's no ability to overcome. And so there's 7 times Jesus in the book of Revelation says, to him who overcomes, and then he gives this objectively an amazing promise attached to each one of these. To him who overcomes, he's talking to believers. So he's talking to people who have something they cannot overcome, they have not overcome, and he's telling them, you've got to overcome this. And so There's another scripture, and I only thought of it before the podcast, and I decided to throw it in. But in First Chronicles 4:9-10, there's just it's the only account we have of this specific person. It's giving like this lineage of this person begot this person. He had these many sons, and it comes to this guy named Jabez, and it says, now Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. His mother named him Jabez, saying, because I bore him in pain. So this is the start of his life. He's named as somebody who causes pain.
Yeah.
But then he prays to God, and the Bible says he calls out to the God of Israel, if only you would bless me and enlarge my territory, may your hands be with me and keep me from harm, so that I will be free from pain. And God granted his request. And so, the reason why I share that is because it states a reputation. He was more honorable than his brothers.
Yeah.
And I think it's attached to this thing. He prays to God. He says,
Yeah.
I don't want to be one who causes pain, and I don't want to be one who has to endure pain.
Yeah.
And the Bible says that God answers his request. So, putting all these things together is, how do we overcome us? How do you overcome? We're talking believers and non-believers alike. There's the issue of conversion,
Yeah.
becoming a Christian, allowing God to make you a new creation, overcoming yourself, all the weaknesses, all the mess ups, all the mistakes. And then as a Christian, areas of your life, I cannot get victory here. I cannot break through. How do we break through?
Yeah. Well, it does, putting it in the categories, believer and non-believer, there really is the same answer for both, is that it is down to a connection that you need to have with God himself. That has to happen at some point. There has to be, like Jabez, a calling out, a crying out to God. And because it has to start there. It has to start with that. I remember my introduction to Christianity. A friend of mine sharing with me about the Bible, what the Bible said. I thought I'd heard the Bible before, and then I realized after I become a Christian that I'd never heard the Bible. And that's the thing that's so funny is that there's so many people that atheists that they don't even know what real Christianity is. They've never experienced it, although they think they've experienced it. And it's not so much a mystery, because it's clearly, the devil wants to keep people from that. But Richard Dawkins is having a debate with a girl. She genuinely got saved. Genuinely had a connection with Jesus, and immediately Richard Dawkins says, "Okay, fine. That's fine. You had this encounter with God, and blah blah blah, and all this kind of stuff. But you go to church, and you have to listen to a vicar talk about all kinds of nonsense." And she said, "Well, yeah, I do go to church and I do listen to the vicar, but I've changed my mind. I used to think like you did, that it was nonsense, but I realized it makes perfect sense." And so that whole idea of, that somehow Christianity doesn't make sense, it's not rational, it's not reasonable, all those kinds of ideas, that it's nothing more than, at the very best, a subjective experience that makes you a better person, kind of a thing. But it's so much more than that. It's so much more than that. To think that the Bible is nonsense, and that's the truth, is that it's not so much people think that the Bible is nonsense. They've heard somebody talk about it, and they've been put off by the way that person talked, not realizing that person may have been talking nonsense. That, quote, vicar may have been talking nonsense. He may not have been talking the truth. But that doesn't negate biblical truth. And once you have actually read the Bible for yourself with an open, neutral heart, you're not already condemning things before you've even looked into it. Even if you never become a Christian, if you follow the Bible and you live according to the Bible, you'll be better off. And this is the funny thing, is that Richard Dawkins actually does that as an atheist. He calls himself a cultural Christian. In other words, he upholds the morals,
Yeah.
the morals of Christianity. I'm sure not entirely so, but
Yeah.
but that's his aim, is I'm going to live according to biblical morality. Well, isn't that funny? Because for many years the idea is you could be moral without Christianity. And so that actually became a movement of which Richard Dawkins was a part of, to automatically believe that morality and Christianity are inseparable. There is a morality that doesn't have to be connected to Christianity, but yet now here he is years later, he has reconnected it to Christianity. And is willing to concede that other religions are not the same. That Christianity is different, and that its teachings, Jesus teachings, are right. And it's so funny that you can believe all that. You can believe in the rightness of the teachings of Christ. You can believe that he was a good man and all that, but yet you're not going to embrace that as a Christianity, which is, that's the sort of plural of Christ. It's like, this is what Christianity is, Christ and what he taught, being lived out by many people. And so, to not be able to come to that conclusion shows that we're, whether purposefully or accidentally, we're trying to live life with a handful of cards missing, and so you're never going to be able to be what you want to be. And so that same idea though applies to someone who claims to be a Christian. It's the same thing, is when you try to claim Christianity without a focus on biblical understanding. It's the same thing, is you'll always come up short. You'll always not have enough, because life requires a biblical understanding. If you don't have a biblical understanding, then it's chaos. And we see the fruit of that. I was listening to a Gen Z liberal news guy. He's actually, he's got about 4 million subscribers, and he's actually seriously, in his mind, trying to compete against Fox News, in terms of popularity, but what's interesting is he's got all these views. He's a liberal, and so I thought, well, that's very commendable, because he has 4 million subscribers. He's taken the world on by himself, basically, and is doing well. But he's and I don't, when I say but he's a liberal, I don't mean that from the standpoint of that there's, being a liberal automatically makes something wrong. What I mean is, but he's a liberal. In other words, being a liberal is more important than those things. Mm-hmm. And so because being a liberal is more important than those things, he has these, he was showing these clips, and trying to attack the false narrative of Fox, so called, and these different interviews and stuff like that, and trying to call them out, for even themselves, And what was funny about it is that if you were able to listen, I'm okay. If you're able to listen with a open mind, you don't let your politics cloud your judgment. He's showing these clips, and he's saying, see, there you go. There's the proof that these people don't know what they're talking about. But yet it's liberals that are having conversations with conservatives that are saying that Trump was actually successful in what he was doing. And I'm sitting there, I'm scratching my head, I'm thinking, how come we can't see that this is what's being said? Is these liberals, they hate Trump. And so they're never going to say anything nice about Trump, but they're saying that his policies are working.
Yeah.
And they're liberals, and they're saying, and he's showing this stuff, and it's like, I'm trying to figure out, how come he can't see it? And the reason he can't see it is because it requires you to have a biblical approach to life. Because the only, when it doesn't matter who says something, if what they're saying is true and it's right, then it's true and it's right. It doesn't matter if you disagree with their politics or their character or any of those things. Truth is not, it's not the product of a person. Truth is truth. And this is why people get themselves into a situation to where, they struggle, with themselves, is because in order to be who they think they are, and that is a real important thing to say, they have to lie to themselves in order to believe they are who they think they are.
Think they are, or think they're supposed to be?
No, think they are.
Okay.
So like this guy, I'm a liberal, I know what's going on, I'm a very intelligent guy,
okay.
blah, 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 because he wants, that's his persona.
Right,
that's what he wants to believe about himself.
So he has to reject truth in order to make that true.
Yeah, and when I say reject truth, I'm not talking about truth of conservatism versus liberalism.
Right.
I'm saying truth in terms of, is it true?
Yeah.
Not truth in terms of, is this what I believe, is the truth. But to be able to admit things that are true, regardless of where they come from. And can't remember who it was who said it. Oh, it was what's his name? Kennedy, the I think he's a senator, but he's not a Kennedy. His last name is Kennedy though. I think he's a Kentucky or somewhere over there. Senator, can't remember his first name. Anyway, he was talking about how I try not to hate anybody, and he's like, because he's a Republican, and it's quite clear that he's not like idolizing Trump. But at the same time, he's saying, because he's talking about Doge and the issues of Doge and all that they're finding.
Yeah.
And he's saying, Donald Trump said, throughout his entire campaign that this is what he was going to do. And now he's doing it. And liberals are freaking out. And it doesn't make any sense. Why are they freaking out? They knew this is what he was going to do, and yet the country voted for him. So the country voted for him knowing he was going to do this. And now he's doing it. And now you're all upset.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense, because what you're basically saying is you're saying that you don't agree with the American public, but yet you're a representative of the American public. It doesn't make any sense. So your politics are really what drive you, not the fact that you're a senator and are trying to help your constituency. You're just in this for yourself, but it's not that kind of a job.
Yeah.
It's not a job where you're in it for yourself. It's a job, you're a representative of other people.
Yeah.
But you're going to get into that position in hopes that you can change, what people want, and so my point in that is the idea of truth. And
Yeah.
so
do you think what do you think drives that mindset? Is it really that this is what people believe, or is it that's what the persona they're trying to put across to other people?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is there are ulterior motives. Okay, that's the important thing, and this is the thing that gets people tangled up in knots, is because they're living life with ulterior motives. So they have a persona that they're presenting. It's not really who they are, but it's who they want to pretend to be, because they actually have ulterior motives. And that's what's jacking them up, is that you have an ulterior motive for the things that you're doing, and that's not necessarily noble, that's putting it lightly. And so what happens is you have a spiritual implosion inside, because you're not being truthful. You're living a lie. And that's I think the root. It took me a long time to get there, but that's the root of why people don't like themselves.
Okay, so all right, this, I really wanted to ask a question to the audience, but I'm afraid we won't really get honest answers. And I don't mean that because I think everybody's dishonest. I just think it's a really hard thing for somebody to. You'd have to overcome something in yourself in order just to place the answer out
Yeah,
there.
sometimes it's easier. That's why these questions and answer things. I'm glad for them, but it's hard for people to be really.
Yeah, I know, which is why I haven't just thrown a question out. I had a
But
couple
I'll tell-
questions, then I deleted it, then I had a couple. Okay,
Yeah,
wait.
but I have to say, being able to be like that is really, it's refreshing.
Yes.
I've been doing it right
Yeah.
now. I mean, I do that in every podcast. Just put out who I really am and
Yes.
what motivates me and
Yeah.
why I'm doing the things that I'm doing, because it's a great way to live, and you do like yourself. You go to sleep at night, you wake up in the morning refreshed, because you're not trying to. The problem, I wish I could remember the exact way it was described. I remember one book that I read, but I think it was a fiction book I read, and the idea is if you're gonna lie, you're gonna have a very difficult life, because you have to spend the rest of your life being sure that you don't untell the lie.
Yes. Okay. So, in the vein of honesty, I'm just going to ask you the question.
Okay.
In this way. So, again, we're talking about, this is clearly not a political podcast, and we're, but dealing with the issues of being personally successful and being able to look at things you need to do, get them done, drill down, beat bad habits, be a disciplined human being. I'm not talking about, I'm going to ask a question about the difference between success secularly and success, in the kingdom. The idea of being able to just, make something of yourself, like I said, or be what God wants you to be. There's clearly not always the same thing. And so that, it'd be good to cover that. But thinking about this practically, what you just said is that one of the bigger problems is that people are dishonest with themselves.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that they're never really honest about what they really want. Or they don't confront what they really want. They don't.
They're not willing to be honest. Yeah, they're not willing to. Yeah, so they're in a negative way. They are unwilling to be honest about what they want because they're ashamed of what they want. But then there's the others that they may want something and they are afraid of the public response by speaking about what they want. So I think, but either way, you end up in a situation, like I said, where you really don't.
So apply that idea practically. That's actually, I put it down. Apply it practically. So how do you apply that practically? Just say I don't want to talk about exercise because we talked about that most of the podcast last week. But let's say I'm a type of person that wants to get closer to Jesus, but I have all these barriers in my mind or in my life. Things that get in the way. It's constant. People say, "Oh, I'd love to come to church. I'm just so busy. I have work." And sometimes,
well, and that's not true. I mean, it isn't. It just plain isn't true.
No. So exactly. That's the point, right?
Yeah, you're never too busy to do what you want to do. That's just a fact.
Okay.
Because life is our lives, especially if you're an adult and you live in the United States, especially. Because you can work things out. Because you do. I mean, oh no, I can't. There's no way. Like often, people, I can't come to church on Sunday or I can't come to church on Wednesday. But I bet you, if there was something that you wanted to do on a Sunday or Wednesday, you would magically be able to work it out so you could get that day off. So it's not really an issue of whether you can or not. I mean, there are some people. I'm not going too far with this. There are some people that they're just slaves. They've resolved that they're just going to work and die and they're never going to get anywhere in life and literally can't go anywhere or do anything. But that's a relative few people. That's not a regular situation for most people. Most people can do whatever they want to do at it. Obviously you can't do it all the time. You can't do it regularly.
Yeah.
But you can make concessions with things in order to be able to do it.
So what would you say is, from your observation, maybe there's only one answer, maybe there's one clear answer, but maybe there's more than one. What would you say is the thing or the things that humans struggle with the most when it comes to this issue of overcoming things?
Yeah, I would say the most important. I think the most. Because they're sissies. That's why. It's thought
You gotta come.
that
You
thought
gotta
just
come.
popped into my mind, and I thought I was
It,
going to say it.
it just popped in there.
No, it's true though. It's true.
Plug for Sunday morning
Yeah,
sermon.
last Sunday. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true because it really is. We can handle a lot more than we think we can, and that is a. Not everybody all over the world is a sissy, but it's primarily, first world people are very much soft. Using the British version of sissy, is they're just soft. They're not willing to endure difficulty. The idea. It's funny. Somebody of my era, to hear about safe spaces on a university campus. That's soft. That's soft because the idea that the world has to cushion your existence makes you very soft. If you can't survive out of your own sense of self-worth and self-worth is probably close enough. To be able to withstand any kind of an environment, where you're the odd person out, even, then you're lacking something. That's very, and the truth is, we see it, don't we? We see it. The whole, everything has a one kind of major thread running through it. The whole question over, how many genders are there, transgender, all the alphabet letters to represent all different kinds of genders and all these kinds of things. It's at the root of it. Everyone knows there's only actually two biological genders, okay? Male and female, okay? You might have a blend, which is a rare situation, but does occur, of where you have somebody who is, has biology, of both, but there's a leaning, there's a predispositional leaning even in that, and so to want to actually fight over the idea of no, there are multiple genders. And that men that don't feel comfortable being men, that want to be women, should be able to compete in women's sports, and that should be okay. You really have to lie to yourself to do that, because you have to say things, believe things that are half truths in order to get there. And the truth of the matter is that those that are struggling with their gender identity, they're not struggling with their gender identity. They're struggling with their identity, period.
Yeah.
They're not, it isn't, and the quick fix, type of generation that we've become, where everything should have a quick, dirty answer. No having to fight with anything, no having to struggle through anything. If it's really worth doing, then it should be easy. You have all these, and so there's this one big thread that runs through all of this is the idea that you're just unwilling to pay the price in order to become what you want to become, and the price is truth and honesty, and you're just not willing to do that. And so that's why you have these people fighting. If you look and you listen to people who are, especially, if you listen to these people in pickets and demonstrations and things like that, quite a few of them, if not a lot of them, they're unwilling to hear opposing views. They're unwilling. They have, and the reason is because they're unwilling, is they're afraid that they won't be able to hang on to that position that they have, if they hear something that opposes it that turns out to actually be true.
Let me interject the question. Why does that matter so much?
Well, because like I said, it's, you have people in inner turmoil. They're in an inner turmoil. They know that they want to be a certain way, but either being that certain way is insidious. It's a dark side thing, or the more weak side thing, which is I'm afraid of what people are going to think if I really give it my best effort, because I may fail and it may not work, and I may not be able to be who I really want to be, and so I would rather hide behind all of these lame excuses. So that's what you have. And so the people who jump into these, listen, having been there, I get this. I totally get this. I became a punk rocker for that very reason. I became a punk rocker because I didn't want to be a part of the mainstream society. Plain and simple. There wasn't a moment in my mind that I thought being a punk rocker was the ideal life. There was never a thought in my mind that if everybody became punk rockers, then we would all be able to live in harmony together. The world would be great. There was never, ever that thought in my mind, and so I dressed differently, acted differently. That period, that era preceded the whole goth movement. It more than likely, if there were goths at my age, I probably would have become a goth, because I can identify with the goth culture, because what I have learned, at least in the UK, and I imagine it's very similar other places, is that I have a real sympathy for people like that, because usually people that are involved in those kinds of things have either been mentally, physically, emotionally, or sexually abused. And they've grown up in really weird situations, whether it's going to be one of those four, and so you can't box it in, but they will have had a really crappy childhood with their family. Their family has been dysfunctional.
Yeah.
I mean, hugely dysfunctional, and that's really, I think, putting on the black and the makeup and all that kind of stuff says to other goths, I'm one of those that was raised in a dysfunctional family, and I'm looking for a way, to not so much a way out as much as a way out of the dysfunction, but joining together, kind of like how people join gangs as well. Gangs are very similar type of a thing.
Yeah.
And so having experienced that, I know what that's like. I know all the mental gymnastics that you have to go through, because it was difficult for me, because I was a real truth type of a person. And so it was hard to be completely truthful and honest as a punk rocker without being able to come out and say, I've chosen this lifestyle and I want to be this way because I'm having problems, coping with life. And I think that's the real issue, is that a lot of people don't want to do that. They don't want to come right out and say, I'm having problems coping with life.
So let me put this question in there as well. This is from the listener here. I might have missed something. You mentioned people being afraid of the public. When it comes to honesty, are you referring to people pleasers, people being afraid of society rejecting them?
All of it, yeah. It's a package deal. It doesn't, the idea is just simply, putting yourself out there as you really are and being rejected, and however that works, whether that's, whether it manifests itself through people pleasing or fear of rejection, it doesn't really matter what you're doing with yourself. That's the core is, I don't want to be rejected. I need to fit somewhere. I need to find my place in this life. And that's the great thing about being a Christian, is that, Christianity, which is funny because a lot of people that have never been Christians, or a lot of people who've never really connected with what Christianity really is, that's what they think about Christianity. So here I am. I'm here, growing up in a normal home. And my home was dysfunctional, but not through abuse. It was, yeah, it's hard to what do you call abuse anymore? I was, I mentioned it before, I was a latchkey kid. I come home from school and I made myself something to eat and watch TV, or went out and played, and this is at 10 years old, 12 years old, just going out in the neighborhood and just running free until 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, when my parents would get home, and I was threatened, under penalty of death, that I should be home when they drive up. And so, we would see their car and we would hop over the fences of the neighbors' all the way to our back house, and we'd get back in, go through the back door, go into our house, and we'd be there having watched TV all the time that they were at work, and but anyway, so that was my life. So that time, at that time of life, it was pretty normal. That was normal for everybody. That wasn't. So that's why I say, was I abused? I guess it takes it to your point of view. but then so then I hit 16, get a car, and now I've got some freedom, and I start getting opportunities to choose things, and I'm being offered alcohol, drinking, and so I'm not really into it, but I drink a little bit. But I'm feeling, the older I'm getting, the more outside I feel, because other people are partying, and this is becoming a real common thing amongst my peer group. And so then I would say 17 was sort of that was the kind of moment, because I had come home drunk for the first time ever. But my parents didn't know that. My parents thought I was a regular partier, and tried to restrict me, take my car keys away. I said no, I'm not going to do it. But I never told them, listen, this is the first time, I'm probably not going to do it again. I just didn't have the humility to be able to say that. It was like, I'm one of the in crowd now. I'm getting punished for being drunk. And so I moved out. I moved out 17 years, almost 17 and a half, somewhere around there, not quite 18. Moved out, and then that was it. Then it was experiment city. Trying pot, trying this, trying that, trying the other thing, and then getting completely into that life. But getting completely into that life and feeling really out of place. I felt really out of place in that lifestyle. I'm drinking, I'm partying, I'm doing all this stuff, and feeling really out of place. It's like, I don't fit with these people, because these people are all shallow-minded idiots. And I've listened to the conversation. They get drunk and say stupid stuff. And it was like, I don't want to sit around drunk and talk about stupid stuff. If we're going to, let's, I was hoping that I would run into people that would be like deep and philosophical and things like that. And that was not, that crowd doesn't go there, and so I don't know if it does today, but it didn't back then. It was just drunk and stupid. And so I was looking for a way out of that. And so that's when what punk rock became attractive, because now some of these groups like the Dead Kennedys and things like that, you listen to the lyrics of their songs, whether you agree with the lyrics or not, the lyrics are about what's going on in the world, and it was a real, shout at the world, it was a fight against the world. And so it was a real enemy and a real plan of action, rather than sitting around getting drunk and stupid, and so for me, it was like, that's great. This is wonderful. I'm in, and it helped me. But then I wasn't in it for very long. I was only in it for probably, I think, 2 or 3 months. But the way I am, everything is OCD. So it's like I was 2 or 3 months, I was making sure to be involved in anything and everything that was punk rock, and being fully absorbed in it. I became a Christian. But the thing that attracted me to becoming a Christian was I can still rebel. So it's like I'm rebelling against the world. I'm rebelling against stupidity. And so I can still rebel. And so I just need to find out what the stupidity is that Christians are rebelling against. And then realize that Christians aren't rebelling against something. It's that the world is rebelling against Christianity. And so it's like, wow, I'm actually on the right side. It's like it was quite humorous for me that, I'm not on the wrong side, I'm on the right side. And so that stuck. And the reason why that stuck was because it was like, I get it now. I get what my problem was. My problem was I didn't like me. That was the problem. And it wasn't so much that I didn't like me, it was that I couldn't find a way of identifying myself in the world. It just anywhere I go, it's like, no, not there's the whole Goldilocks thing, too soft, too hard, too soft, too hard, too hot, soft, too hard. But Christianity was like, now I get it. It wasn't about being just right. It was, I get it. The reason why it's too soft, too hard is because the world's all messed up. The whole world is messed up. It's not just partially messed up. I was listening to a great book The CEO of NVIDIA. It was about him, and it's a fabulous story about his success, and typical sort of Elon Musk type story of coming to the verge of looking into the abyss and back, and success as a result, and looking at all that, and he made this statement. He said, "For me, work is relaxing." And so he works a lot, and he expects everybody to work as much as he does. But for him, work is relaxing. And I thought, isn't that interesting? The only thing that would make work relaxing would be that you found a purpose. You found a purpose in your work. And he does. And that's the thing is the whole, they've gone from, NVIDIA has gone from, making cards that are fabulous for playing video games to now to AI, and are really becoming an instrumental player in the world scene of technology, right in the middle, in the thick of technology, and looking at all this, but at the same time realizing, what, this is still, because as a Christian, my mind's been open to the truth, is that, 100 years from now, nobody's going to be talking about NVIDIA and the amazing technological breakthroughs that they've done. We will have moved on a million miles. Does anybody still sit around and talk about the iPhone and how important the iPhone is to the world? And if it wasn't for the iPhone, not cell phone, specifically the iPhone, exclusively the iPhone. But there was a period of time where the iPhone was like, this is the most amazing gadget ever created.
Yeah.
And now nobody even cares, because work, secular employment, or even worldly success, it's still not you being who you are.
Okay, so you're going to have to expound on that in my next question. But before we go any further, it's 7:46, and we always, toward the end of our podcast, have at least we make time if questions come in for anything off topic. So, if it has to do with podcasts, you can to this or the topic that we're talking about tonight of being tired of you or overcoming yourself, that you can put in any time. But if you have anything that's not related to that, you can put those in now. And then at 8 o'clock, we will answer any of those questions that come in, if they come in. So, I was going to actually ask the question. You can just expound that on that, what you were just talking about. But how does, success is kind of the word success in, as a Christian, how does it differ from success in this secular world, from the standpoint of somebody just overcoming
success,
things?
I would compare success in the secular world to success in the Christian world to your worldview as a 5-year-old and your worldview as a 60-year-old. I would compare them that way, because as a 5-year-old, you're very, very limited in everything, and so because you have a limited worldview, there are things that are important that they won't be important at 60 years old. You just they will not be important. Simple as that. You don't have a 5-year-old growing up one day and saying, I knew this at 5 years old, and at 60 years old I found that this is the key. That's just never going to happen, because you don't have enough experience in order to be able to be that. Even if you're a genius, even if you're an absolute genius at 5 years old, unless you have learned how to read and have been reading a lot and have really developed a worldview, you've developed it, from books. That's just not going to happen, because you can't. That's the only way that you can actually broaden your worldview as a young person, because you can't obviously travel the world and things like that. You have physical limitations of things you can and can't do. And so it's a similar thing as so let's put it this way. If Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs, well, he's passed away, but Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, just keep throwing bunches of people in there. If they ever met Jesus in a true Christian experience, it would so radically change their worldview that their preoccupation with the the things of this life that would they'd be nowhere near the same. Yeah, they would be nowhere near the same. They would see them as child's play, because they would see, this is not headed to the ultimate goal. And it's interesting, when you listen to these people and they're asked the question about God, it's always the question is always dealt with from the standpoint of creation itself. It's just, how did the earth get here? Not the idea of eternity. And I don't think that any of them, if asked the question, okay, so eternity's real. Okay, we've found out, scientifically proven, eternity's real. And everybody's going to die and stand before God and give an account of their lives in eternity. Would you still be doing what you're doing? I doubt very seriously that the answer would be yes. Because the success that they're chasing in this life is banking on the fact that there is no eternity. It's banking on it.
How do you mean?
Because I might as well do this because I'm going to die and go into the ground. So the best thing that I can do with my life is use it in such a way that makes it better for those coming after me. And that really is the best that you can get when it comes to a secular version of success. Are you leaving a legacy? Are you leaving something behind so that the people that come after you will benefit? And, it doesn't really matter whether or not they remember you in the process. You'd like to be remembered, but that's not a necessity. The necessity is to leave the world a better place than when you arrived.
Yeah.
And that is, that those kinds of statements are made all the time by the movers and shakers that are not God-fearing people. But when you cross that bridge into the understanding of the truth of eternity, that's now you can see why you have people that have given up earthly success, or seemingly given up earthly success, for some other thing. Probably one of the greatest stories of modern times is Eric Liddell, however you want to pronounce his name, in Chariots of Fire, because this is a man who had promise in Olympics, and in running, and was a natural born runner, even of his own admission, but had an encounter with Jesus that he was willing to just let all that go. Ended up going to China, ended up being arrested and dying in a Chinese internment camp. And so people would look at that and say, what a waste, what a waste. But yet Christians understand. Christians, true Christians, they get that. They get the idea of what he did and why he did what he did, and only hope that God could do the same with them. And are praying for that end. God, I want to be that kind of person. I don't want to leave behind just a temporary influence. I want to leave an influence that's going to take people into eternity, and then one day I'll see them again. And
what do you call that?
What do you
call that mindset? The difference there. If you could just, what do you name that? What's there in a Christian and not in?
Well, eternal perspective is the actual way of saying it. It's eternal perspective, having an eternal perspective. And see, when you don't have when you have only a this life perspective, you have a stunted view of life, because life is just going to. So in the mind of the highly motivated, very, very successful person is this reality, and you can ask them, they will tell you, is one day this world's probably going to just shut down. The world that this version, of the world is going to come to an end. The whole thing's going to collapse into a heap of nothing, and then it'll do it again. For some reason, somewhere along the way, it'll happen again, and the whole thing will just start all over again. And there are many that believe that is already happening. And we just don't know about it because the universe is very, very big. And so, but that's the thinking is that it's always going to be finite. It's always going to be a finite experience. Life is by definition, a finite experience, which is hilarious because there are many, many people that are trying to overcome the finiteness of life and trying to discover, cures for diseases and aging and things like that because they want to live forever, but yet they live as if life is not going to last forever. And so it's like I said, it's all about legacy, from there, is, coming up with brilliant ideas that people are excited about and are helpful. Elon Musk made this statement in an interview. He said, if me being able to say what I want to say costs me money, so be it. And there's an idealism there, but it's still this life thing.
Yeah.
Because okay, fine, you've overcome, you can't be bought, which is a good thing. That's a major thing. There's a lot of people that can be bought. Most of them are in politics, and that's why they're in politics, is because they want to be bought. That's their whole kind of goal. And there are others that they may start idealistic, but it dies very quickly. It's kind of like my brother-in-law was a police officer, very idealistic. He's gonna fight for truth and justice, and by taking care of the bad guys, and then he gets into the dark side of life, and he realizes, a lot of these people we call good guys are bad guys. He's arresting good guys, because they're really bad guys, and then the whole thing becomes, wow, the whole world's just jacked up. And so it can make you cynical really fast. But the point, though, that I think is very important is understanding that, this life is simply training for the next. It would be like, you take classes to learn something, and then you go do something. Like you go to university and you get a degree. It's not an end in itself. The degree is not an end in itself. The degree is the ability to be able to engage in some activity, with intelligence and understanding, and be able to be successful in that. And that's this life. The training for this life is really how to be successful in eternity. But most people want to just use it as playtime. It's like people who go to university for the party life.
Yeah.
And then they flunk out.
Yeah.
Because they party too much. And so it's a similar thing. So what a lot of people do, they flunk out of life, because they're only in it for the party, and then they flunk out.
My mind is going through all these dorms that I work in, these total party houses. Like, golly, how do these guys survive, man?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's the thing.
And how many of them will, I guess, is the real question. How many of these guys are actually going to make it through this?
Well, that's sometimes the reason why those people are there is because their parents don't know what else to do with them.
That's true.
It's like, what, okay, we're going to throw, hundreds of thousands of dollars at an education. Hopefully this will straighten you out.
Maybe. There's a big, expensive maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's 7:58. So okay, so let's just drill this down. That how, maybe I can ask it in two questions. What is our number one hindrance, and what is?
Well, I think I answered that one.
Yeah, you did, but they're just kind of a cap. Let's cap the whole thing, summarize everything, and so that we leave with the answers. Is what is the thing that holds us back, and then what is the thing that will help us become overcomers, and actually.
Okay, so the overcoming really is understanding that eternity is real. We are going to stand before God. We are going to give an account for our lives. Let's not spend a lot of time trying to make this into some binary choice of going to heaven or going to hell. It's not. It would be great if it was like that, but that is not the case. We don't know who's going to go to heaven and who's going to go to hell. We don't know these things because we're not there yet. You can only know that after you're dead. But what you give your life to will determine your eternity. And so that is the issue. That is the important thing to understand, is that Christianity isn't a formula that once you check all the boxes you're saved. It's an experience, and having that experience, being faithful to that experience, and growing in that experience is what prepares you for that day of being, when we stand before God and give an account of our lives. And you have to see this in a much more dynamic way. It's frustrating to me because it isn't. I mean, yes, sinners, for the most part, non-Christians don't think about life in terms of heaven and hell as a priority. It's more like, bad people go to hell, good people go to heaven, and that's kind of the end of it. But the people that should be defining that better are not, because there's a lot of Christians that believe exactly that way. Good people are going to go to heaven and bad people will go to hell, and I'm a good person, so I'm going to heaven. And that's it, and that's the only criteria they need. But the reality is, if you want to know whether or not you're going to heaven, look at what you're living your life for. If you're living your life for this life, you're probably not going to heaven, because you're not ready. You're not preparing. You want to live this life. You want to squeeze as much out of this life as you can before you die, because when you die, you don't know what's coming next. That's the truth. You don't know what's coming next, and that's why you're living for this life, is because you don't know what's coming next. But for those that do know what's coming next, then they're not living for that. They're living in preparation for eternity, and so they are living their lives biblically, with an eternal perspective. It's not just doing religious things. It's becoming a certain kind of person. It was this guy Jensen Huang. He's I think, I may be pronouncing that wrong. He said intelligence is not what makes you successful. Character is. And this is somebody who's not a Christian.
Wow.
He's not a Christian. And he's not coming from a Christian perspective, and it's, it's like, see, we know these things, and but so what is your character? That really is the question, and building a character is critical, and you'll know, honestly, you will know whether you're building good character or not when you like yourself. If you don't like yourself, it's probably because you've got crappy character. To be honest, because you can be fairly confident. I'll add an addendum to Jordan Peterson's 10 laws of life.
Yeah.
Is that if you don't like yourself, probably other people don't either.
Yeah. Yes, that's a good one. And then the honesty thing has to kick in at some point.
Well,
Everybody loves me. Really.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
And so the honesty will drive you to, okay, the reason why I don't like myself is because of this, and then you begin to change those things, and then surprise, surprise, people start liking you.
Yeah.
Because you like yourself.
Yeah. Very good. Well, it's 8:03. We'll cap it there. We don't have any off-topic questions tonight. I know tonight was, slightly different than what we've kind of developed as a style, but we'll be here again next week. I felt like this was a good topic to talk about tonight, we appreciate you joining, and we will be here again next week with another topic. And we'd love it if you came back and invite folks, send the links out to people. You can click the notification bell as any other YouTube channel, and it will send you reminders of anything we have upcoming. We always post our events ahead of time, and so That way you can know what's coming up. You can see the topic titles. Maybe you have questions on topics like that. And honestly, if we start off in a direction maybe you didn't think it was going to go, just throw your questions in. There's no right or wrong question. It's just a matter of throwing them in, and if they're off topic, we'll save them for the end. But we always welcome questions and comments within moderation. But we'd like you to know about some of the events we have coming up soon. We do have a play that we'll be doing here at the church on Easter Sunday. That is the 20th of April, so that's in 2 weeks. And we would love for you to join us. That'll be during, in place of our evening service. It starts at 6:30. And we will put some information on your screen here in a second. Other events we have a midweek service tomorrow night. We'd love for you to join in person if you're here in the local area. But if nothing else, we will be here again next week, and we hope you can join us.